So I'm not going to get in trouble with this because I'm going to give my analysis and my perspective as to how I see um, exams are being conducted and what could be improved. I'm going to actually speak about each examiner on a one-to-one as to how they assess exams and so on. And I'll be a bit critical, but objectively so, and I might be in trouble for that, and probably I am hoping not, but probably someone might treat me differently on exam day. But hey, I'm gonna be truthful and honest based on my ability as to each examiner, just like the examiner should do for each instructor as well. And let's see how it goes. But this is my honest opinion, no malice and no um, evil thoughts going on here. Just honest critic as to how I see exams are conducted and who can improve, what they can improve on, and things of that sort. So here it goes. Always get myself in trouble as usual. Instructors teach as they believe the students will be marked or examined upon, and so the level that the examiners bring forward towards a practical exam is that level the instructors will strive to achieve. So if it is bare minimum standard, then the instructor will try to achieve that standard. As the examiner increases in the standard, then they expect the instructor to do the same. So for example, we don't really do parallel parking, and so you'll not find most instructors teaching the students how to do parallel parking because it is not a criteria for the exam. It is not something that it is on the criteria sheet, but it's not something that we will expect to be done. Another example is the emergency stop. Many of us don't teach the emergency stop because we know the examiners will not be testing us on emergency stops. Well, and this is another problem here too, because we find one examiner would bring it up, but other examiners don't. So Felix, for example, would have students execute an emergency stop, but I have never gotten one from Source or from Henry. I have gotten from Eugene a few times, but very, very rare, but primarily from from Mr. Felix Ford. And that's what I'm saying. All of the examiners have to be testing on the same things. Not that every exam have to be doing every single thing that is on the criteria sheet, but we can have one examiner focus on one aspect, and whereas the others just forget about it totally or completely. We must have some form of uniformity in the practical exam. Also, whereas the criteria might be the same for the test, I think the marking process to ascertain as to whether a student should pass or not, the methodology used is not the same by examiners, and I think that should be something that they ought to look into. For example, I've got an exam where a student would fail just because they stalled once, or just because they coasted for a short period of time, or kept their gear for a short period of time where the revs wasn't that high, and things of that sort. I don't see it as the correct way to be measuring an exam. The method used to judge a student, it ought to be uniformed, and this is what we're not seeing as instructors. In this regard, I must say I've seen much improvement in Mr. George and the way he tests a student and the method in which they mark them as to whether they're competent to drive or not. Because he did fail myself once for stalling once, and another time for coasting for a short period of time. But now I realize that only after a number of times of realizing that someone will be stalling stuff, then he would probably mark it as a fail. So I've been seeing great improvement in him, and I must say he's one of the most underrated examiners they have, and I could explain that later. I say underrated because he goes on an exam and he doesn't really take notes, but then when he comes back, he'll give an overall view as to how he saw the exam went. Many of times I find it's on point. Although sometimes he would forget certain things and he overlooks certain things as well when doing the practical exam, which is something that he ought to work on. But his general view would be better. Now, he's an examiner. If you're going to have automatic students, you're probably going to go with him if you want to pass and you know your student is not up to par, because he more looks under the physical aspect of the driving and kind of doesn't pay focus that much as to the technical aspects of driving, like probably how Ford or Source would. Um, so that's something you should check on as well. But if it's a practical for manual exam, then you probably don't want to send yourself with him because it looks more physical and the physical aspect of does the vehicle roll back, did the stall, or get it move off in and things of that sort, which is also part of the exam, but then he focuses more on the physical aspect of the driving rather. So he'll tell you, I like a smooth, nice drive. If the drive was rough, and then see whether if the drive was okay, yeah, I didn't see no, but it was rough, and I don't think you should give you a pass if it was rough. I that doesn't cut it for me. So I think that's something you should work on. But as I said, he's underrated as to driving exams and the way he conducts it. He actually does a fair job. I had an exam with Source well a couple of times, but I find Source does talk too much on a practical. On a practical exam, you have to be there to assess the student's ability to control a vehicle safely and under control. And because of his constant speaking, he kind of put the students off, and then the students start to be under more pressure, or they're already under pressure, and then to do things that they ought not to do, and not being focused because they now focus on the last question he asked or last thing he did, and so on. I think Source is stuck into that, hey, I'm still an instructor and it's not an examiner. When you're an examiner, you're not an instructor. And I think there's a conflict within his brain between the two. And I think there's something you have to work on. Allow the students to do the exam. At the end of the exam, then you could bring up what if so was wrong and stuff like that. I'm not saying not to guide them occasionally, but it's a bit too much in his conducting the practical exam. And that's what I see there. Sometimes I think he's a bit too hard on certain aspects, and that's why you have some instructors run away from him and find excuses to either go with not Felix, but rather go with Henry. So they find all reasons to, hey, run away from going to the exam with him. And I see that as well, and I think they kind of correct in the way that he assesses exams. So, for example, I send the Ministry of Transport, get onto the main road, and from the Ministry of Transport junction, the student kept going in second gear, all the way by the power station, going to the next corner. The student kept going in second gear, but they kept the other RPM just about 3,000. Now, the correct change in RPM ratio would have been 2,500 RPM to change to the next gear if you want to be perfect. But they kept it at 3,000, and you could have heard the sound saying it's time to change. But then didn't change as he was approaching the sharp corner. Sign just past the tire shop, so they kept it in second gear. Then went around the corner in second gear. But then afterwards, the student did display the ability to change the gears, where they went to third and so on when it was time to change the gear. And when he got back to the ministry, he felt the student that he kept the vehicle in second gear for too long. It was long, but it was not excessively too long. And I felt the student should have done that. It was a judgment call. So many times the test is a judgment call by the examiner. But this one I felt, hey, the student did keep in second gear for a while, but from the Ministry of Transport to the corners before the tire shop, just passing the power station, I don't think that was long enough. Had the rev been excessively high, probably 4,000 RPM to not change the gear, then I could understand. But it was not that high. So I think sometimes he marks a bit too hard. Yet at the same time, sometimes I feel, hey, other students will do it and then they will get a pass. So we need consistency, and I have to talk about consistency now. Overall, I'll give Mr. Felix Ford the top notch for driving examiner of the year and previous years as well, because of his consistency. And being consistent as an examiner is very, very important, because it says, hey, there's no favoritism when you're going to do your exam or conduct the exam. It means everybody gets the same fair chance of having that exam done. And then therefore all instructors know hey, what level they ought to bring the student at to do that exam. And that's why I would say Mr. Ford is the top examiner in my point of view, followed by Mr. Eugene, but I know most of people will disagree with me, and then followed by Henry, and then Sauce. But I will speak about inconsistency in regards to many times when I go and do an exam with Henry. I went on and do an exam with Henry for a student, female student, and the student was breaking the speed limit all the way through. The student did not stop for a stop sign. The student did slow down but did not stop, and the student made countless other errors. And when he came back to the ministry, I was so sure that student failed. I actually messaged the student, somebody else, and the person the student has failed. When I got back and you told the student, yeah, you made some errors, but I don't see any other examiner giving you a break, so I'm going to give you a break. Now, that speaks volumes when you say you don't see other examiners giving a student a break, but you give a student a break. It means that the student has not met that standard, or they should get their license. And that's when I believe it's okay. Now, it also brings down the expectancy of the instructor as to what's the level of proficiency you're looking for. Because, see, Mr. Henry, I was on the test with another student, and the other student, relatively look over his shoulders, such a quick look. Although he did look over his shoulders, but it was not an efficient look. And when we got back, the student failed for that, and the student failed for using the gear selector for automatic too rough. I don't see anywhere where that would be a fail. You're damaging your own vehicle, but I don't see anywhere that would be a fail. The student was using it rough. But yes, the student failed for that, and I was like flabbergasted. How could a student fail for that? But that was it. So the consistency there was not what I was expecting. Well, I expected from him, but then it should not be that way. So we want exams where persons are tested on the very same things, and the way that the exam is marked is the same. Obviously, all examiners will have their own style and stuff, but then the way mark ought to be the same. So we can't be failing a student because they stall once and the examiner would allow them to stall 3 times. It has to be the same all around. Alright, minor faults is minor faults. 3 minor faults in one category is a fail. 1 major fault is a fail. Mark according to the faults. You need to examine to go and study the handbook for examination, not the highway code, the DVSA rules for examining, to how to do the job efficiently. Final thing I must add is not for the examiner to have the instructor to assess the student at the end of the exam. I've been on an exam where the examiner said, I don't know if I should give you a pass or if I should give you a fail. Sure, what do you think? Do not put that on the instructor. I have been in situations where the examiner then says, you failed, and when the student has to argue, the examiner says, well, I'll tell you what, I'll discuss that with you afterwards, and if he believes that you should get a pass, then we're going to give you the pass. That's absolutely wrong, and that should never be done, and that has been done before, and that should stop. I've been on an exam where the examiner would say, hey, what do you think you should do about this one? No, that's your responsibility to assess the exam, not mine. So you need to medicine fail or pass afterwards, then we'll have a discussion afterwards, but not first to have a discussion. And finally, don't ask the instructor questions as to rules and guidelines as to the exam and highway code. You're not testing the instructor.